And welcome back to our series of reading A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. On this journey, we continue reading In the Cart by Anton Chekhov, written in 1897. We're now heading into page 5/6 of the story. And most recently, we passed through sort of a telling of how authors can bypass ritual banality avoidance. For example, if a short story leads to a conclusion that is so obvious, the power of storytelling really disappears. For example, in this story, we know that Myra is a lonely school teacher on the path from the village back to the town where she lives and has the school, and suddenly a handsome but a man with also his challenges and struggles, Hanov, passes by. Well, the natural story would have been, wow, these two found each other, they found love, and happily ever after. But Chekhov doesn't do that. And so we've just passed this section in the book or in the short story where now the reader is meant to be wondering what's going to happen next. And so, as we dive right back into the story, this is Chekhov. Hold on, Vasilevna. Another steep climb. She had begun to teach school from necessity, without feeling called to it, and she had never thought of a call or the need for enlightenment, as it always seemed to her that what was most important in her work was not the children, not enlightenment, but the examinations. And when did she have time to think of a call or calling of enlightenment? Teachers, and very interesting, impecunious physicians, doctors' assistants, for all their terribly hard work, do not even have the comfort of thinking that they are serving an ideal or the people, because their heads are always filled with thoughts of their daily bread, of firewood, of bad roads, of sickness. It is a hard, humdrum existence, and only stolid cart horses like Myra Vasilevna can bear it for a long time. Lively, alert, impressionable people who talk about their calling and about serving the ideal are soon weary of it and give up the work. On a quick aside, this is Philip here speaking. It's such an interesting thing about cultures. And generally, when I, as an American, think about Russian culture, and I very frankly so, I've never been to Russia. I don't know very many Russian folks, but I do feel a stereotype of it's hard. People work very strongly. The focus is on survival, having enough for family. And it's very interesting now, this dichotomy that Chekhov, even in 1897, is pointing out to us. People that are up for that, call it existence meant for some higher power, is very different than folks like Myra who are living to survive, that are focused on just the small things, getting past that day. And here I think it's such an interesting character placement or even description of these two characters where we know there is this separation, that there is this one lifestyle and there's another one, and here we are living in this village. And so kind of back to the story now. Semyon kept on picking out the driest and shortest way, traveling now across a meadow, now behind the cottages. But in one place the peasants would not let them pass, and in another the land belonged to the priest, and so they could not cross it. And yet another, Ivan Ionov, had bought a plot of land from the landowner and had dug a ditch around it. They kept turning back. Phil here again. This actually reminds me a lot of the conversation I just had with Hugo, where the beautiful mountains that we have here in Oaxaca, Donají, as well as Huayapam, they belong to some of the community, and so they do say no to passing. It's not our God-given right to do whatever we like wherever we are just because we're human and think that we have some sort of right to the world. And so it is interesting that also in Russia, in this time period of this writing, there is that also part of it. Something like in the States, if you were to block a road, someone would probably call the cops and it would be all bad. There's less so of that community aspect, and so that's what reminded me of it here. And back to the story. They reached Niziane Gorodisht, near the tea house. On the dung-strewn, snowy ground, there stood wagons loaded with great bottles of oil of vitriol. There were a great many people in the tea house, all drivers, and it smelled of vodka, tobacco, and sheepskins. The place was noisy with loud talk and the banging of the door, which was provided with a pulley. In the shop next door, someone was playing an accordion steadily. Myra Vasilievna was sitting down, having tea, while at the next table some peasants were drinking vodka and beer, sweaty with the tea they had had and the bad air. "Hey, Kuzma!" people kept shouting confusedly. "What's doing? The Lord bless us! Even Demenich, that I can do for you. See here, friend." A little pock-marked peasant with a black beard who was quite drunk was suddenly taken aback by something and began using foul language. "What are you cursing about, you there?" Semyon, who was sitting some way off, remarked angrily. "Don't you see the young lady?" "The young lady!" someone jeered in the corner. "The swine! I didn't mean nothing." The little peasant was embarrassed. "Excuse me, I pays my money and the young lady pays her. How we do, ma'am?" "How do you do?" answered the schoolmistress. "And I thank you kindly." Marya Vasilievna drank her tea with pleasure, and she, too, began turning red like the peasants, and again she fell to thinking about firewood, about the janitor. "Wait, brother," came from the next table. "It's the school ma'am from Vyazovye. I know, she's a good sort. She's all right." The door was banging continually, some coming in, others going out. Myra Vasilievna went on sitting there, thinking of the same things all the time, while the accordion went on playing and playing behind the wall. There had been patches of sunlight on the floor. They shifted to the counter, then to the wall, and finally disappeared altogether. This meant that it was past midday. The peasants at the next table were getting ready to leave. The little peasant went up to Myra Vasilievna somewhat unsteadily and shook hands with her. Following his example, the others shook hands with her at parting and filed out singly, and the door squeaked and slammed 9 times. On this page, the process of characterization through specification continues. This is George commenting on the book. Myra becomes, again, a slightly more specific Myra, which we've learned is a key tenet of storytelling. The story form reminds us that a human being is never static or stable. The form demands that the writer honor this. If a character keeps doing or saying the same thing, keeps occupying the same position, we will feel this is as static, a repeated beat, a failure of development. Here, we learn that Myra is not a person called to teach. She was forced into it by financial necessity. It has always seemed to her that the examinations were what mattered, not the children, not enlightenment. We note that continually increasing particularity of this person Chekhov is making, the extent to which she has just departed from a first-order, cliched, overwork, idealistic teacher. She is not, never has been, a teacher for love of it. This is part of what has worn her down, the absence of love for her work. She started out not full of hope, but disliking the work, understanding it as beneath her, something at which it was possible to fail, rather than something she might do out of love. Chekhov is averse to making pure saints or pure sinners. We saw this with Hanov, rich, handsome bumbler, and drunk. And we see it now with Myra, struggling, noble schoolteacher who has constructed her own cage through joyous complicity in her situation. This complicates things. Our first-order inclination to want to understand a character as good or bad gets challenged. The result is an uptick in our attentiveness. Subtly rebuffed by the story, we get, we might say, a new respect for its truthfulness. Here we just about settled into a simple view of Myra as a completely innocent, blameless victim of a harsh system. But then the story says, well, hold on. Isn't one quality of a harsh system that it deforms the people within it and makes them complicit in their own destruction? Which is another way of saying, let's not forget that Myra is a human being and complicated and susceptible to error. Hers is a sad situation, but now we understand that she has contributed to it by not having the wherewithal to rise to the occasion of the work. I revise her slightly in my mind. She's limited, a bit less capable. On the other hand, what kind of Russia is this that compels a person to work a job to which she has no calling and be so reduced by it? To have to collect funds and teach in a drafty room and get no support from the community. How could anyone love that life? I find myself thinking of Terry Eagleton's assertion that capitalism plunders the sensuality of the body. Just imagine that many Myras who have existed all over the world, their best selves sacrificed to exigency, whose grace suffered under the pressure of being poorly suited to the toil required of them to make a living. Maybe like me, you've been one of them yourself. As we've been saying, the story form is ruthlessly efficient. Everything in a story should be to purpose. Our working assumption is that nothing exists in a story by chance or merely to serve some documentary function. I'm going to highlight that actually and read it again. As we've been saying, the story form is ruthlessly efficient. Everything in a story should be to purpose. Our working assumption is that nothing exists in a story by chance or merely to serve some documentary function. Every element should be a little poem, freighted with subtle meaning that is in no connection to the story's purpose. Honoring this principle, let's call it the ruthless efficiency principle, or REP, as our cart enters a town, Nizhny Gorodische, we find ourselves asking, what's the purpose of this town? And because it is a town in a story, the only possible answer is this. This town is here to do some work the story needs it to do. So what should we actually ask is, what is the purpose of this town? Why this town and not another? Watch your mind as you read this paragraph toward the end of page 7 to see what Chekhov wants us to notice. They reached Nizhny Gorodische. Near the tea house, on the dung-strewn, snowy ground, there stood wagons loaded with great bottles of oil of vitriol. There were a great many people in the tea house, all drivers, and it smelled of vodka, tobacco, and sheepskins. The place was noisy with loud talk and the banging of the door, which was provided with a pulley. In the shop next door, someone was playing an accordion steadily. Now, this is a good description. That door pulley makes it come especially alive for me, but it's also a pointed description. As we follow Myra inside, Chekhov wants to convey something to us. As we read, scanning for implication, we find ourselves collecting negative words like dung-strewn, vitriol, smelled, noisy, loud, and banging. Adding in the party sounds and the perpetual droning accordion, we conclude that Chekhov wants to communicate. This is a rough place. Consider this differently flavored version. Near the tea house, on the white, snowy ground, stood wagons loaded with generous containers of oranges and apples, shipped from exotic, faraway places. There were a great many people in the tea house, all drivers, and it smelled of tea and something baking in a tremendous oven at one end of the room. The place was noisy with happy talk, and the constant joyful opening and closing of the door made for a festive, welcoming feeling. In the shop next door, someone was playing a light-hearted dance tune on an accordion. Such a town could exist, has existed somewhere, but Chekhov didn't need that one. So, a lonely woman, discontented with her life, which she feels is beneath her, walks into a rough place, a place into which, in the life she was meant to have had, she would have never set foot. The movie producer and all-around mensch, Stuart Cornfield, once told me that in a good screenplay, every structural unit needs to do two things. 1, be entertaining in its own right, and 2, advance the story in a non-trivial way. We henceforth refer to this as the Cornfield principle. In a mediocre story, nothing much will happen inside the tea house. The tea house is there to allow the writer to supply local color, to tell us what such a place is like. Or something might happen in there, but it won't mean much. Some plates will fall and get broken. A ray of sunlight will come randomly through the door to no purpose, just because rays of sunlight do that in the real world. A dog will run in and run out because the writer recently saw a real dog do that in a real tea house. All of this may be entertaining in its own right, lively, funny, described in vivid language, etc., but it's not advancing the story in a non-trivial way. When a story is advanced in a non-trivial way, we get the local color and something else. The characters go into the scene in one state and leave in another. The story becomes so much more particular version of itself. It refines the question it's been asking all along. So, what happens here? A pockmarked peasant swears. This falls into the category of local color. Then Semyon reacts to the swearing by calling the peasant's attention to Myra's presence. Don't you see the young lady? In a workshop, we talk a lot about raising the stakes of a story. Semyon just did this. This was a bare wire labeled Myra and a bare wire labeled peasants in a tea house. And electricity was coursing through each, but they were laid out parallel to one another, several feet apart. Semyon, by reacting to the swearing, just crossed them. Myra, who and those gathered peasants had nothing to do with one another, were not in relation. Now they do and are. Someone jeers at Semyon's characterization of Myra, the young lady, meaning both, you call her young and you call her a lady? Suddenly, the room is full of tension. Myra has just been insulted twice, indirectly by the initial swearing and directly by the jeer. We feel the potential for this room of peasants to turn on this elite schoolteacher. Who's there to defend her? The tension gets diffused by that sweet little pockmarked peasant whom I always imagine looking like Sleepy of the Seven Dwarfs, doffing his hat in my mind as he apologizes. Myra accepts his apology. How do you do? She says stiffly, afraid maybe that this will escalate further. So, a close call, one that underscores Myra's tenuous position among the rabble. Had that swearing peasant been a different swearing peasant, it could have been worse. It will be worse in about 20 years when Russian Revolution breaks out and some of these same peasants march up the road and seize Hanov's estate. What is Myra's reaction? She drinks her tea with pleasure. She could have done so with shaking hands or near tears, but no. Maybe it occurs to us this isn't such an unusual experience for her. We took it harder than she did. She's likely been in this tea house many times before, on or other trips to and from town. Maybe this low-level taunting has happened before. Our understanding of Myra has been refined again. This is not the story of a woman only just now falling in the world. It's the story of someone who fell some time ago and is so used to her fallen state that she's no longer particularly outraged by it. She fell, is still falling, may fall further still. She's nearly a peasant herself. Has the scene fulfilled the Cornfield principle? I think it has. Though she has previously presented herself through her inner monologue as a woman fallen to a life among the rabble, we maybe didn't really believe her. Now we do. In those monologues, as in, I suppose, all of our inner monologues, she regained control by subtly judging Semyon and Hanov and through the very act of intelligent reflection. But now we've seen how precarious her position really is. In fact, it's worse than she knows. She's become blind to how far she's fallen, but now we know. Imagine a person walking along a street thinking it might be time to buy a new suit. This one he's wearing is pretty good, and the people are always complimenting it, but what the heck, he should treat himself. On his way to the store, he passes some teenagers who make a joke about how old-fashioned and crappy his suit is. We feel pity for him, but we also suddenly see his suit. Having seen the difference between Myra's internally narrated version of herself and her actual position in the world, I find myself feeling more tenderness for her and more protective of her. This more complicated, endangered Myra is the one I take with me to the end of the story, which is now, take heart, 3 pages away. There we'll finish off on this part, and we'll continue reading tomorrow, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. And I think today what we'll highlight is definitely the cornfield principle, which is to be entertaining in its own right and to advance the story in a non-trivial way. Every structural unit needs to do this. We'll also talk about the ruthlessly efficiency principle, which is everything in the story should be on purpose. I'm Philip Chen, and we are magical. Take care.